Sri-Aurobindo Darshan. A Radiant Personality. An article written by Sri Dilip Kumar Roy. We are taking it from his book Among the Great, published by Jaico, Bombay, 1950, pages 201 to 8. At that time, I was athirst for light, especially light on his yoga. I was then on a musical tour gleaning data on different styles of our music in different provinces. But somehow, my work didn't grip me, although it still interested me. So I grew more and more eager to meet him once face to face. At this time, I was drawn and yet scared by the idea of yoga, or rather by my fanciful conception of the conditions of yoga. This was partly because mine had been preeminently a social temperament exulting in the sunlit soil of travel, music, laughter, and robust optimism, which, in Sri Aurobindo's language, support the vital egoistic life of worldly activism. Be that as it might, it cannot be gainsaid that all I had stood for outwardly had been utterly out of tune with what the authentic yoga, with its life of one-pointed aspiration and uncompromising self-surrender, demanded. No wonder I was scared by what I then thought yoga had in store for its devotees. A life of awful austerities, desiccating discipline, and withering solitude, all of which meant for me an utter stultification of life. Yet, I was so attracted by Sri Aurobindo's analysis of our world and his idea of evolution from the spiritual point of view that I sincerely wished I could somehow practice his integral yoga. I particularly liked his teaching, Arrogant Reason Its Place, for I was deeply dissatisfied with the arid view of science that life was an accident. I was growing skeptical of the learned ignorance of the reasoning mind, which in the end led nowhere. So I wrote to him asking to see him. He consented. I made immediately for Pondicherry. It was in January 1924 that I saw him for the first time. I had the privilege of having a long talk with him on the 24th. The next day, the duration of the talk was shorter. I kept an elaborate record of all that had passed, and this report I sent him subsequently for revision. He approved of it substantially and made only a few minor corrections. But as these interviews were not published then, and as I received from him after I had come to live in his ashram permanently as his disciple in 1928, numerous letters throwing further light on his yoga, I have thought fit to add some extracts here and there from these letters written in answer to my deeper and more obstinate questionings. This device will, I hope, serve as a partial corrective to my own, in brackets necessarily, inadequate representation of his replies, to which no penmanship can ever contrive to do justice. These subsequent explanatory notes, whether added to his talk or substituted for my original report of it, I have placed inside double brackets. It was about 8 in the morning. Sri Aurobindo lived then in the house which stands at the main entrance of the ashram. He was seated in a chair in the front veranda. I made him my pranam and took another chair in front. An oblong table stood between us. A radiant personality sang the very air about him. A deep aura of peace encircled him. An ineffable yet concrete peace that drew you almost at once into its magic orbit. But it was the eyes that fascinated me most, shining like beacons. His torso was bare except for a scarf thrown across. The greatest living yogi of India. My heart beat fast. Hitherto, I had seen but a few sadhus and sannyasis, but a real yogi who lived thus for years in seclusion and yet took some interest in my doings. Now I read from the footnote. It was years later that I came to know that this had been more than a passing interest. He wrote then about this meeting of ours, in brackets. I can't quote the whole of it, it is too personal. It is a strong and lasting personal relation that I have felt with you ever since we met and even before. Even before I met you for the first time, I knew of you and felt at once the contact of one with whom I had that relation which declares itself constantly, and followed your career with a close sympathy and interest. It is a feeling which is never mistaken. It was the same inward recognition that brought you here, Sri Aurobindo said. Another disciple of his told me years later that he had told them then that I was destined to come to him. He wrote too in a letter of his already published in my Anami. Your destiny is to be a yogi, and the sooner your vital Purusha reconciles itself to the prospect, the better for it and all the other personalities in you. The footnote ends. He appraised me with his soothing yet penetrative grace. It would be impossible adequately to portray my reactions. After a time, I pulled myself together with an effort. I have come, I stammered out, to know, to ascertain rather, if I can be initiated. I mean, I want to practice your yoga to start with, if possible. He simply said, you must tell me clearly what it is that you seek and why you want to do my yoga. I was lost. Why did I know myself? How then to put it all clearly and cogently? I strove hard to find some light in my bewilderment. Suppose I found tongue at last, I suggested, or rather suffer me to ask if you could help me in attaining, or shall we say discovering, the object of life? That is not an easy question to answer, he said, for I know of no one desideratum which is cherished equally by all, any more than I know of an object of life equally treasured by all. The object or aim of life cannot but vary with various people, and seekers too approach yoga with diverse aims. Some want to practice yoga to get away from life, like the illusionist, Mayavadi. These want to renounce life altogether, since this phenomenal life, they contend, is an illusion, Maya, which hides the ultimate reality. There are others who aspire after a supreme love or bliss, yet others want from yoga power or knowledge, or a tranquil poise impervious to the shocks of life. So you must first of all be definite as to what precisely you seek in yoga. I want to know, I proffered desperately, if yoga could, in the last resort, lead to a solution of the anomalies of life with all its native sufferings and humiliations. You mean transcendent knowledge? If you like, but then no, for I want bliss too, crowning this wisdom. You can certainly get either from yoga. May I then aspire to an initiation from you? You may, provided you agree to its conditions and your call is strong. Couldn't you give me an idea about the nature of these conditions? And about this call you speak of, may I ask what you mean exactly? I gathered from your booklet Yogic Sadhan, I pursued before he could reply to my question that you called yourself a tantric who believed in Leela and not a follower of Shankara believing in Maya. You have written, for instance, to fulfill God in life is man's manhood. And if my memory doesn't fail me, you said in your Life Divine, we must accept the many-sidedness of the manifestation even while we assert the unity of the manifested. It is true that I am a believer in Leela. He nodded. But why exactly do you refer to that? I wanted to make sure whether you really meant what you wrote in your yogic sadhan. I hope too that your yoga doesn't make it binding on one to live like a cave dweller who disowns the many-mooded active life, or shall we say like a passive pensioner whose day is done. This hope happily has been fostered by your repudiation of Mayavada. I see what you mean, he said, giving me an indulgent smile. Well, yes, I am not a Mayavadi, happily, for you as well as for me. But incidentally, I am not the author of the book Yogic Sadhan. How do you mean? Haven't you heard of automatic writing? Planchette? Not exactly. I merely held the pen while a disembodied being wrote off what he wished, using my pen and hand. May I ask why you lent yourself to such writing? At the time, I was trying to find out how much of truth and how much of subliminal suggestion from submerged consciousness there might be in phenomena of this kind. But let that pass, he added. To return to your main question, you asked about the active life. Well, it isn't binding on you to renounce all that you value in your active life. What you must be ready to renounce is attachment to everything on that plane, whether you live within or outside the wheel of karma, action. For if you keep these attachments, the light from above will not be able to work unhampered to effect the radical transformation of your nature. Does that imply that I must forego, say, all human sympathy and true friendship, all joys of life and fellow feeling? It doesn't. Absence of love and fellow feeling is not necessary to the divine nearness. On the contrary, a sense of closeness and oneness with others is a part of divine consciousness into which the sadhaka enters by nearness to the divine and the feeling of oneness with the divine. An entire rejection of all relations, indeed the final aim of the Mayavadin, and in the ascetic yoga, an entire loss of all relations of friendship and affection and attachment to the world and its living beings would be regarded as a promising sign of advance towards liberation, moksha. But even there, I think, a feeling of oneness and unattached spiritual sympathy for all is at least a penultimate stage, like the compassion of the Buddhist before turning to moksha or nirvana. Then there is a footnote. Sri Aurobindo wrote once to me in 1934, "Nor is friendship or affection excluded from the yoga. Only we seek to found them on a surer basis than that on which the bulk of human friendships are insecurely founded. It is precisely because we hold friendship, brotherhood, love to be sacred things that we want this change, because we do not want to see them broken at every moment by the movements of the ego, soiled and spoiled and destroyed by the passions, jealousies and treacheries to which the vital is prone. It is to make them truly sacred and secure that we want them to be rooted in the soul, founded on the rock of the divine. Our yoga is not an ascetic yoga. It aims at purity, but not at a cold austerity."